Hello. This is another little thought about Marcel Proust. I've done a few videos about Marcel Proust, and I love his writing. Absolutely love it. And I am reading. Um, you might know it as Remembrance of Things Past, or you might know it as In Search of Lost Time. But I think the last time I was on, I was reading The Captive, which is also known as Sodom and Gomorrah. I think there are a lot of different names for different um, volumes of this 7 volume semi autobiographical novel by Proust, written in the early 19th, 20th century, um, are but known by different names in English because they're translated from the French. So it depends on the translator, and people have their favorite translators and everything with this. Some people like Moncrief, and I'll have to think about it now because I have to buy a few more volumes of it because I'm binding up to make my own special edition of the original 7 volumes separately. But I'm buying like secondhand books like this, and I'm going to rebind them. And I have some of those done already, which you can see in the other videos. And I show you how to do binding actually. But which one is, I think it might be volume 5 that I'm either on or that the captive was. But my topic for today, because I've gotten so far in this book now, made up of different volumes, that I'm able to get an overview of the whole book, and a feeling for the author of it. And the author, he did what I did when I was writing, actually. When I wrote my first novel, I used Donna Emerald, my own name, as the name of the main protagonist in the novel. And I thought that was a good literary device to make it easier to tell a story which had a lot of fictional components, but which was going to have elements of my personality as well in the protagonist's personality. And because I was a new novelist, I wanted to make it uh, as easy as possible by making me, we're all enthusiastic about ourselves, aren't we? So making it kind of about me. Now, there's loads of stuff has been written, a lot of which I haven't read yet. I might someday, about how autobiographical the memories and everything in the book that Proust is discussing, because it is a remembrance of times past, or In Search of Lost Time. That title implies that as well, doesn't it? That it's going back through memories of a lifetime. So, how much of that are his memories, because the main character is Marcel as well, and how much is fictional? Now, that's relevant because the question of this video is, was Marcel Proust a woman hater or misogynist, or whatever you want to call it, a person that's not very keen at women at all, about women at all? He has a lot of them around him in the book. He's clearly very obsessed with them, but you do start asking yourself after a while, does he really like them, you see? Because particularly, I was particularly the last one I read, the captive one. That's a rather, it is, although it's a translation, it's a rather literal title. Although the other title that it was translated to, Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the other title it goes by in English, is less literal than the captive. But it is about a kind of a hostage situation in a relationship that he's having with this woman that he refers to as a girl all the time. He does have a bit of an obsession with girls, for a start, not just women, which is also something that brings up the misogyny idea. but his outlook on women is really strange. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt and then talk about that in relation to the book. And it's very revealing. I was almost revealing myself because I was reading it in the bath, so it's a little bit wet around the edges, but there's no greater pleasure than reading in the bath, and Proust is really fabulous. But I sprang up out of the bath saying, Eureka, with this great idea that sort of I had definitely made up my mind about whether he was a woman hater or not, based on not just this passage, but the rest of the book that preceded it, creating, I don't like to make up my mind in a hurry, creating a big picture. So I'll just read you this little excerpt. And after some shocking events of the previous volume, The Captive, where he was going out with this woman, Albertine, and he was actually living with her, which was a kind of semi-scandalous at the time. You kind of had to hide it a bit, like even though French society was a little bit tolerant of, some things like affairs and things like that. There were the social niceties around things that you sort of, the polite thing to do was to hide the fact that you were doing this, so he was kind of hiding that fact from people. But the whole relationship was a very hidden, kind of an intense relationship with control issues in it. But when something shocking happens at the end of that volume, the relationship is over, and there are a lot of revelations come out, and he goes away in his period of starting to recover from what happened at the end of that relationship. He goes to Venice and has a holiday in Venice, and is very interested in women again, you see, or girls, really, because he's never lost his interest in very, very young girls. So this little excerpt is when he's in Venice, right? As for my comparative penury, it was all the more awkward at the moment, inasmuch as my Venetian interests had been concentrated for some little time past on a young vendor of glassware whose blooming complexion offered to the delighted eye a whole range of orange tones, and filled me with such a longing to see her daily that, realizing that my mother and I would soon be leaving Venice, I had made up my mind to try to create some sort of position for her in Paris which would spare me the distress of parting from her. The beauty of her 17 summers was so noble, so radiant, that it was like acquiring a genuine Titian before leaving the place. But would the scant remains of my fortune be enough to tempt her to leave her native land and come to live in Paris for my sole convenience? So he seems to be interviewing for another candidate for the position that Albertine had, in a way. Perhaps not to live with, I don't know, he doesn't specifically say to live with. But the candidates he has been looking at have been all very young, and he's a middle-aged man. So they're very young. He mentions girls as young as 16, so this one is 17. And the things that recommend her to him are all physical attributes of beauty. And he doesn't seem to know anything other about her other than her job is being a Venetian glassblower. Um, so there's no sort of intellectual meeting of minds there comes into it in the idea of having a relationship or why he's so keen on her. It's just the beautiful orange colors of her face and how beautiful she is. in the way a Titian would be beautiful. And I have an example of a Titian painting in my thumbnail, which I hope nobody will report for nudity. I've strategically and unfortunately, in my eyes, as I'm an artist and I don't like covering up paintings, but I've put the public domain attribution in the relative spots of the nude that the gentleman in the painting is admiring. And it's a Titian. And I had the pleasure of seeing that painting in the Prado in Madrid and sat in front of it. I remember I was ill at the time and I wasn't able to walk around a lot, but I had a wonderful time sitting in front of it for about an hour. And I'm glad I spent the time in front of the painting because you see things that you didn't see at first and see more depth to a painting all the time. And I saw a couple of deer in the painting in the background that were up to some very naughty things as well. So it's about voyeurism, that painting. And if you're interested in paintings in Proust, this is a beautiful book. This Eric Carpeles writer has all these excerpts from Proust with gorgeous paintings throughout, and I'm loving reading that as a companion piece to the Proust. So, okay, so he sees women in a very objectified way. I'm not basing it just on that excerpt. Um, I'm basing it on previous. It really came to the fore in the previous volume, The Captive, where he had his girlfriend really quite captive in that relationship. Literally, she could leave, and part of the shock at the end of the book has to do with that. Um, but um, he worked it in a way that he was trying to make her as dependent on him as possible, but was playing all sorts of weird mind games with her as well, to make her dependent. And throughout he called her in that volume. He constantly referred to her as child in the volume, and although she was young, she wasn't a child. She was in her 20s, as far as I can remember, and it does bring up a thing about the time the book is written, because an apologist for you know his attitude towards women generally, um, might say that no, at the time, that was how men were with women, so that somehow makes it okay. Yeah, at the time, that is how men were with women, and a lot of in the early part of the century, this whole Victorian idea of treating women as as though you're their father was very, very prevalent, and also a semi-mentor. And you can see that in his treatment of Albertine. He actually states that he's going to um, educate her, and he's quite proud of her education. And I've actually gone out with somebody who was like that, who thought he was a fatherly figure who was going to re-educate me and everything. And he was the stupidest guy I've ever met. Like, he wasn't anywhere near Proust in terms of intelligence. So you couldn't argue that Proust was not an intelligent man. But the whole book shows how intelligent he is and how, what a deep thinker he is. But a whole lot of personality limitations come up about him that you sort of go, wow, I can't believe somebody so intelligent doesn't see how monstrous some of the behavior is. But some of it he does see is monstrous. He does see elements of his behavior with the girlfriend, Albertine, as quite monstrous in the previous volume. But he doesn't want to give up on it, and doesn't ever question that he shouldn't be doing it. He has no qualms about doing it, unless, I kept wondering throughout the novel, unless he wanted to shock us into saying, my goodness, Marcel is a monster. Uh, that can happen in a novel. And uh, as a novelist writing, that's a difficult tightrope to walk. And I actually not sure how much awareness he had of the kind of hatred he had for women. And I'm not on the fence or walking a tightrope in saying that I think he was a real woman hater, you know. Um, Despite his obsession with and fascination for women, and frequently you will see that people who are guys who are very misogynistic will make apologies, a kind of an apology or an excuse really for the misogyny by saying, but I love women. I love being around them, you see. And I have a lot of women in my life. And somehow that's supposed to mean that they respect women. The two are not the same, you see. And uh, it's very clear when you're reading this that he doesn't really have respect for women as individuals in their own rights, and that you can only go so far saying that's of his time before you sort of say, well, this goes further, because he's talking about controlling women to an extent that's very perverse, really, and perverted and devious, and far beyond what even a decent husband of the time would feel was permissible, which was quite a lot. I'm not making apologies for that myself, because it was ridiculous. The society was ridiculously patriarchal in the assumption that you were in control of women, and that you were the father that had to guide women, and that there were some sort of simpletons that couldn't think for themselves. Whereas a lot of women actually had amazing accomplishments and everything that really weren't appreciated, because they were considered to be, just by the fact that they were women, inferior, which is bigotry, like, a ridiculous level of bigotry. But I would argue that it comes out of fear, that when you go back through history, go back through time, that originally there were a lot of matriarchal kind of gods that people worshipped. And all those matriarchal goddesses were very deliberately, I believe, killed off by societies when societies developed along the lines of patriarchal societies becoming patriarchal, and that it just persisted, and then it sort of reached a crisis, if you like. And that crisis didn't sort of start dying off until like the 1970s, really. I think, people talk about the 60s being an era of liberation. And the idea of women's liberation, of course, started much earlier than that. You can look back to suffragettes and everything like that. And they wouldn't have been so far distant from Marcel's time. But then you had women still fighting for respect and being able to get equality in terms of legal rights and everything like that. Up to the 50s and 60s and 70s with feminism, and the suffragettes were the start of that, and getting votes for women was a huge step, and then getting the right to work and not being considered property that your husband owned and all that, terribly important for women, um, because you could get yourself into kind of situations where legally nobody was going to stand up for you if bad stuff happened to you, And some of the stuff in Proust, in these volumes, is uncomfortable in that way, but the way he's talking about it, he's actually exposing it. So there's an honesty there in that he's bringing it to the forefront, showing you, and kind of showing you that it is sick, but in his character of Marcel, is not saying this is sick and I shouldn't be doing this. You see? So there's a kind of there's a double thing goes on there where you're just not sure where he stands on it, either as a writer or the character definitely doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. He thinks it's perfectly fine, and it's a repeating pattern, you see, because he's going out looking for the next, he's on the prowl for the next girl, because young innocent girls really is what they're not women, they're not grown-ups. That's very relevant. Earlier in the novel, he was bringing in women from the street to sit on his knee, but they were girls. They were all little working lower class girls. And there's a very a relationship he has with women that you use them to fulfill your needs. And of course, prostitution comes into that as well. He's very comfortable with prostitution, hanging out with prostitutes in the evenings and things like that. No problem at all. Even like while his girlfriend is at home and things like that. It's a total double standard. He's trying to keep her captive, but there's no question of him being a captive to anything, except that there is a realization that behaving like that can make you a captive, where you're captive to your desire to control things. And that was one of the really interesting themes in that particular volume of Remembrance of Things Past. That Albertine had kind of turned the tables, and there was this realization happening that, as the reader, you are then being asked to ask the question to yourself, who is the captive in that? Who is really the captive in that relationship? And I don't like reading books about relationships and things. I think, they're boring. They're too introspective, and putting too much emphasis on relationships, because I'm very introverted, and I don't kind of pin all my hopes on relationships and things. So I don't read kind of love novels and things and think they're terribly important and want everybody to get married at the end. But Marcel was incredibly introverted and very introspective as well. So I can really relate to some of the kinds of insights he has into human behavior. And the thing with Marcel is he runs into women a lot and moves in circles where women are very powerful. So you're thinking for a while, I don't think he is a woman hater. I mean, I'm talking about the author here, not the character Marcel in the book, because there's distinguishing points between the two. So, for example, Albertine is a fictional character, but I mean, although all these women, he's moving in these circles where there are a lot of powerful women on the social circuit that he's talking about, and they're very clever. A lot of them are very clever and very accomplished and very sought after for their sort of social get-togethers and everything in their sort of salons. The salons of Paris were very big thing. So you kind of think, well, he talks about them like they're very powerful women and he's comfortable with them being powerful. But you see, he's comfortable with them being powerful in the sphere of the social arena where they are a hostess with the mostess. You see, they're not really the movers and shakers within governments and things like that. And but they can make and break men, but they do it in a devious, behind the scenes kind of way of sniggering about somebody who's Jewish. There's a character, Swan, in it, who's Jewish, and he has a daughter, Gilbert. And Gilbert, when the father dies, the daughter's is doing the social circuit and everything, and becomes acceptable after a while of not quite being, everybody not being quite sure if she's acceptable or not, because she's Jewish. And the whole Dreyfus affair brought out a lot of the anti-Semitic elements that were already in a Parisian society, you know. But she becomes acceptable again, but you can't mention the father, you see. And it's a lot of the women that do the inviting and everything to different parlors and everything, you know. So, and different get togethers and little concerts in their homes and things like that with refreshments, you know. Um, and of course, the all important introductions to who's who, you know, in the upper echelons of society and royalty and everything involved. So, very important stuff they're doing, but they're only makers and shakers in that they say who's acceptable within the society and who isn't in a not in a lawmaking sense, but within their small lower down tier of that um, whole societal um, organization thing, you know. Um, so you do have a few brushes with political figures in it who are really making the decisions, and you see how some of the decisions are influenced by these people and everything. But really, it's the men doing that kind of decision making on a national level, whereas the women are holding together the social sphere and the arts, and you know, um, they're seen as the gracious hostesses who are educated only for purposes of entertaining people, you see, because they don't really have any of the wealth themselves except what they've inherited through the patriarchy. So they don't really have the power, you know. Um, they just support the really powerful men. And just in finishing off this thought about, you know, why I think he is a woman hater, even though some of the female characters in his book are incredibly enjoyable. um, I think the the important thing that's a key to the Marcel in the book, and you know, probably the real Marcel, and I don't know enough about the real Marcel to know, because I read books that are novels. I come to them very fresh as a person who doesn't read up everything about the author. I'm always meaning to, but unless there's a particular point I really want to know, like the point that I wanted to know about the little patch of yellow wall that was talking about a Vermeer painting, that bit in the book, which was also in The Captive, blew me away to the extent I went on the internet and looked up what that was about and found out that there was an episode in Marcel Proust's own life that had to do with him being taken ill on the steps of a gallery. And uh, he had an author getting taken ill, and but you know, hurrying to see this very important Vermeer painting that he loved, you know. Um, even while very ill. And I thought it was so amazingly written that I went off looking for that. And yeah, it had to do with his life. So, you know, there's an entanglement there, obviously, with the author himself, his life, and the book. And I think that might be giving the book some of its power. But I think that I don't know whether Marcel was an awful person himself, and whether his ideas about women were that repulsive. uh, or not. But the thing is that Marcel in the book, right? The character Marcel in the book is a mammy's boy. He's a real mammy's boy, loves his mammy, nothing wrong with loving your mammy, loves his grandmother, nothing wrong with that either, but very much tied to them by the apron strings, drags them around everywhere, and is a sickly, weak little boy who gets, you get the impression, pampered a lot by them, and you know, sits around not having to do very much except act in a very pampered way. And he likes pampering other people as well, like Albertine, but only to control her. He buys her fabulous clothes and even promises her cars and things like this. And it's along the lines of, if you do this, you can have this. So it's a very controlling relationship, you know. Whereas their control, the women in his life, the important women in his life, their control over him only comes through their love of him and their appearing subservience. Yet he can play with that idea because he can have a housemaid called Francoise, I think her name is, who is terribly cheeky to him. And she is a wonderful character, and she's awfully cheeky and rotten to him altogether, and says terrible things about his girlfriend because she hates the girlfriend, but she's loyal, see. So he needs a lot of these people to prop him up because he's quite a weaky kind of person himself, you know. He's a very weak person, propped up by very strong women, and you just realize they're strong, but what he sees as their strength is their kindness to him, because their kindness is enabling him to have this very pampered, cork-lined invalid life that he's living, that he loves. Like, he loves spending days in bed and like talks about illness like it's a little treat, you know. It's very weird. There's this kind of really weird vibe going through the book, but it's so fascinating to read about. And the social aspect of it is very fascinating as well. And I think that he does it so much better than Henry James, who everybody goes on about. And I've read a few books by him, including The Ambassadors, which would be one of his um, most well-known books. And he's an American writer. I don't know, is he around the same period? But he does things about that social scene as well. But I've never really, you know, people say he's an amazing writer and stylistically amazing too, and you know, has fantastic insights. I don't see any of that at all. I just don't get him. You know what I mean? Some writers are not on your wavelength, but Proust is doing the same kind of thing, but I relate to the way he's doing it. I relate to the way he's doing it, and I relate to the books, and they're absolutely, I'm loving them. All the volumes so far are really loved, and they're so interesting. The characters are so interesting. The language is so interesting. The writing is so interesting. The ideas are so fantastic. But I probably would hate that character in person. And the fact that Marcel Proust even managed to think up an individual that devious and perverted in the way he thinks of his relationships with women, um, I don't think I would like either of them as people, really, possibly. Even though I love intellectuals, you know, but that doesn't stop me enjoying the book. So Proust walks a great tightrope there. And as a writer, if you're a writer, um, you could learn amazing things from him, because you don't have to have these one-dimensional characters that you absolutely love and everything about them is very PC, and you agree with everything that they like and you hate everything they hate. That is so limited, it really is, and people are not like that. People have all these oddities about them and all these personality things, that a lot of which you will find defects, and then you'll find other things in the same person fantastic, and you just love them, you know. So to be able to get that into a novel, but be able to, for a reader to be able to tolerate the parts where you're hating the person and thinking, oh my God, what a monster, is some feat. And he manages, because even the bit where he's being absolutely monstrous to poor Albertine, and you're sitting there going, I don't believe he's doing this. Oh, that's so monstrous and so devious what he's doing now. And then he exposes other people in social society as terribly devious, monstrous people as well. And the whole society itself is very, the way it works, the way that social scene works and all their little networks and everything is really screwed up. and psychologically just a really horrible place to be in, a horrible space for people to be dysfunctionally engaging with each other in. It's just all very dysfunctional, you know. It seems to work really well in terms of the parties keep going on, but underneath it is what he's exploring. And he's saying it's really dysfunctional, but look, I'm really dysfunctional too, and I'm human too. So he makes you think about all that. And it's the fact that I think it's the fact that he's inviting you to think about that is the saving grace in the book, that you don't end up just hating him. That is his redeeming feature, other than the beauty of the language and everything in it, and all the ideas are just so fantastic. Um, so writers can really learn so much from it about writing characters that are not boring one-dimensional characters. And readers can learn so much about life from reading his books as well. And they give so much, you know. So I'm trying to luxuriate over it and read it really slowly, and digest it like it's a beautiful box of chocolates that filled with different champagnes and truffles and all sorts of things that I don't want to just gorge my way through. I'm trying to save and savor it, but I'm getting further through the volumes, and I know I'll reach the end. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read it again from the beginning, because I had picked up my reading of it after some years on the whatever volume I was on, and lost the original copies that I had. So I'm going to buy some of the new copies to complete this set that I'm binding, and I'll probably read it again. So I might, before I pop my clogs in life, get to read that again, because you got a bucket list, haven't you, when you get a bit older for books. And this year is going to be things like Finnegan's Wake is going to happen this year. That was another one I put on pause for a while, but I'm going to resume that one this year. And I'm tipping along, but absolutely loving this. But my opinion is that yes, Proust is a woman hater. Now, I could ask you for your opinion, and you're welcome to give it just based on the excerpt that I read at the beginning, but I don't think it's fair to judge somebody just on one statement, because he could have made one statement like that about women and you go, wow, that's shallow. you know uh, but then he could have said all sorts of in-depth things intellectually, about wonderful intellectual conversations he's had with Albertine elsewhere in the book. But no, actually, he just said, like, oh, I realized how much Albertine had learned from me when she started talking about arts in an educated way, and I was proud of the work I had done, that kind of thing. So it was supported by stuff he'd said elsewhere in the book. So even given the period in time it isn't acceptable. You know what I mean? It's not an acceptable way to view another member of the human race as, inferior as a starting point. But it does make for a very interesting theme in the book. And I've spoken before, if you're a writer, this is for writers again, or readers, I suppose, if you're interested in themes and sub-themes and the difference between themes and plots in a book. And actually, readers should get themselves aware of the difference between a plot and themes in a book when they're reading, because you get so much more out of your reading. So perhaps go and look for that video as well. I spoke about that specifically in one video. I think it might have had plots in the title somewhere. So that's my little thoughts for today. I'm off to have my lunch and maybe do a little bit more reading or a bit of knitting. Bye bye. Have a lovely Sunday if you're seeing this on Sunday. And have a lovely week to come. And I hope you'll fit some reading in. Very important for the mind to keep learning and thinking. Bye.